Hi everyone. Welcome to week three, 3 weeks of Dante's
Mhm.
Inferno. I'm gonna hand it over to Elias to get us started. This week we had cantos 7, 8, and 9. Although who knows where we'll begin.
Yeah. All right. Hi, everybody. Um, I want to say I'm going to jump back for just a brief thing that we skipped over back in Canto 6, and it has to do with what they call the municipal theme in Dante, the theme of the city. This sounds funny, I guess, or maybe I'm trying to be too much of a presentist, but I was thinking about Minneapolis and the pride that the people there are taking in their city. There's an
Hmm.
Italian word for this. Some of you may know it. Campanalismo. Italians are very, traditionally, they have always been very attached to their city. Their identities are from their cities. That's been true for a long time. And what we're getting to here in this part of the Inferno is a very serious and anguished meditation on that, both um, in the ways it's powerful and good and builds solidarity, and also in the ways it is destructive and hellish. So, jumping back just for a moment to page 47, if you have the Pinsky, this character Chaco. Chaco's in hell because he was a glutton, um, which seems like a peculiar sin in a way. But what he's talking about is a couple of things. He does something that is kind of shocking for Dante, although it's in response to a question. Dante asks him around line 53 or 4, what of things to come? And what Shako is going to give him is a prophecy of Dante's own fate. There'll be more of this coming later, but it's just striking. Dante says, tell if you can the divided city's fate, and of the citizens, is any one just? And tell me why such schism threatens it. And Chaco gives him a prophecy, saying, after long argument, they must descend to bloodshed. And the rustic bloc, which is a shorthand for Dante's group, um, with much offense will expel the other first. So Dante comes into political power as one of the six priors of the city in the year 1300. He's kind of at the top of city politics, in other words, in this medieval commune. Um, So the rustic bloc with much offense will expel the other first. Then, through the power of one who, while we speak, is temporizing, this is Pope Boniface VIII, the great villain of the poem, that party too will fall within 3 years. So he's saying to Dante, who is already in exile, obviously, that's where he's writing the poem from, I'm predicting what's about to happen to you. The ousted coming back with head held high, and long will they prevail despite the others' cries of shame and despair under their burdens. Only two men of all are truly just. We're not sure who Dante is referring to here, by the way. Um, and then he's Dante pleads with him, and he asks, "I'd have you tell me more." And Dante names some citizens that he thinks of as the leaders. They're really valuable, important people of his tragic city. And he mentions Farinata, Mosca, Tequiaio, men of good reason, Jacopo Rostacucci, Arrigo. So tell what portion their souls inherit now. And Chaco tells him, to his astonishment, their souls are among the blackest in hell. In hell. So, and then finally, Chaco asks that Dante remember him back in the sweet world, in the world of light. So that's a bit of a shock, and it also again sets up this theme of the city and the importance of the city. Um, I love this quote from the Russian poet Mandelstam. His little essay on Dante is in the shared folder. I want to give you just briefly what he has to say about this theme. Urbanity, urbanism, hatred of a city. This is the matter of the Inferno. The circles of hell are merely Saturn's rings. Here, those of immigration. For the exile, his one forbidden and irretrievably lost city is scattered everywhere. He is surrounded by it. I would say that the Inferno is surrounded by Florence. Dante's Italian cities, Pisa, Florence, Lucca, Verona, those lovely civic planets, are stretched into monstrous rings, stretched into belts, returned to a foggy, gaseous state. So, um, so the civic theme is a very important um, element of this. It's what we were saying at the beginning about poetry and politics. It's the second of the two big themes that are always in the background here, which sometimes readers don't immediately pick up on because it takes a little bit of digging to find them. So let's go ahead and start with Canto 7, which begins with this strange sort of guttural voice of this character Plutus, the pagan god of wealth, um, in a language that no one has figured out. The canto begins, Pape Satan, Alepe. So the translator goes on, Plutus began in a guttural, clucking voice. So Virgil knows how to sort of shush Plutus. He calls him an accursed wolf. And then finally, warning him that we have a pass, we have a golden passport, if you like. We cannot be stopped on this journey. And then Dante drops in a simile. Just as sails swollen with wind, as soon as the mast is snapped, collapse and plunge, that savage beast fell shrinking to the ground. So we descended. He has a kind of a comic, grotesque deflation of this character as they are about to go forward. We're moving into a realm where the sin here is a combination of going too far in two directions, and that is there's the sins of avarice, but also the sin of extravagance, which is a curious thing to us, hoarding and squandering. In the Middle Ages, there were things called sumptuary laws. If you lived in a real community, a face-to-face community, where walking down the street, you could encounter a citizen and ask for the address of another citizen, and almost certainly they would know it. So that's a kind of like a Aristotelian, vision of the perfect size for humanity in terms of urbanism and all of that. So in a way, the city was involved in the personal lives of citizens in the sense that there was a shared bond about going too far. So that, you if you had wealth, you were not necessarily allowed to waste it or go too far, or for that matter, you could be criticized for being avaricious and stingy. And Dante is furiously critical of avarice in this poem. But there was always the idea there should be an Aristotelian mean, which is where Dante's kind of going here, which is liberality, to know the right thing to do. And as so much of this poem will show, Dante's trying to remind us through his great teachers, what's the golden mean here? What's the balance that human happiness depends on? You can't lose it. You can't go too far. So the other theme here is just the theme of the economy and the fact that Dante inhabits a city where there is tremendous growth, prosperity. The Florentine florin, this beautiful golden coin, is probably the most prized, coinage in Europe at that time. The city is going through this wonderful expansion, which Dante has very grave doubts about. And as we get into it, they might remind you of feelings that people have today about gentrification or what's sometimes called catastrophic wealth. Dante feels that's what's happening to his city, that when he was growing up, was a much smaller place. It still had some dynamism, but it wasn't going at the furious clip, building, expanding, more city walls, and so on, that he was witnessing. So he was very troubled about that, and that the sins of usury, simony, barratry, buying and selling of church offices, and fraud. He's going to devote a third of the Inferno to these sins. So he's very disturbed by it, and he is going to try to remind us why it's the, the underlying factor in the demise of the city that he loves so deeply and is so aggrieved by that he puts 30 Florentines in hell. So in many ways, you could say hell does seem to be the dark back alleys of the city of Florence. Okay, so he's looking at the people that are hoarding and squandering around line 45. He's asking the master, who are these people? Why are they going through this strange Sisyphean process of running in a circle or halfway around a circle? They collide. And then, as he puts it, um, at the circles facing points that mark the division between opposite faults, those bare of head, those are the clergy, were clerics, cardinals, popes, in whom the passion of avarice has wrought excess. Among these, master, I'm sure I'll recognize some who were thus polluted. And Virgil tells him, no, actually, you won't. These sinners are so immired in their punishment, you will not be able to recognize them. So, wrongness in how to give and how to have took the fair world from them and brought them this, their ugly brawl, which words need not retrieve. Dante decides not even to speak them. So that's the sin that's he's focused on here, and it opens up another very big theme for him, which is the economy and wealth. And people often don't think much about Dante as a critic of the economy of his time, but that's really at the bottom of his complaint about the church, or a lot of what he's complaining about with the church, is the way avarice, simony, and these other sins have so distorted its mission. Okay, he then does this weird thing of talking about Fortuna, a pagan goddess. Dante sort of rehabilitates her. He turns her into not a blinded figure standing on a wheel, but a kind of an angel or a goddess. It's the only time in the poem where he sort of creates an unknown deity, which is a peculiar thing to do if you think about it. Anyway, so that's Fortuna, the opposite of Plutus, you might say, and the distributor of God's providence. So, see, he explains a bit about her, and then finally, toward the end of the canto, he notes a feature in the landscape. We've traveled to the circle's further edge, where lines 91, where a foaming spring spills over into a fosse, a little creek or moat. The water was purple black. We followed its current down a strange passage. This dismal watercourse descends the gray slopes until its torrent discharges into the marsh, whose name is Styx. I just want to do a brief thing on the rivers in hell, because this is something that really grabbed my imagination when I first realized what was going on here. There are four rivers in hell. There's the Acheron. We saw that back around circle 1, where we cross over to enter into hell, the river of woe. These are all taken from classical mythology. There's the Styx. That's where we're about to go in the fifth circle here. It's the marsh of the wrathful and the sullen. A little lower, there's the Phlegethon, the river of fire, which is a river of boiling blood that punishes the violent. And then finally, at the bottom, Cocytus, the River of Lamentation, which is a vast frozen lake where traitors are imprisoned. These rivers are fed by tears and also human blood, which if you think about it is a mind-bending kind of notion. But that's where the rivers of hell come from, that combination of the liquids of human woe, you might say. So Dante looks within that bog and he sees these characters. I'm still at the end of Canto 7. Looks of fury striking each other with a hand, but also with their heads, chest, feet, and backs, teeth tearing piecemeal. And Dante and Virgil explains these are the souls whom anger overcame. There are even souls beneath the water who are those suffering from acedia or despair, sullenness. Um, and he says, we have this black mire now to be sullen in. This canticle they gargle from the craw, unable to speak whole words. So they go on crossing the swamp until at length they come to a tower's base. So a pretty grim picture. Anybody want to throw in any thoughts on that? He is
Uh,
setting us up, by the way, for another big theme about politics, which is Canto 10 in Farinata. But in these visions of hatred and partisanship and the power of anger really in the city, in other words, in politics, this is very much something he wants to talk about. Yeah, Andrew?
yeah, I just wanted to mention, am I muted? No. Am I good?
No, you're
Okay, I
good.
just wanted to mention this, the very beginning, and the translation of Pluto to Plutus and
Yep.
the difference between the two, in that Pluto is sort of a god of the underworld, and Plutus is a god of wealth, and how the two sort of actually have a connection. And I find it interesting. And this guy, Hollander, his other translation mentions that now it's translated usually as Plutus, god of wealth, but that is a god of the underworld. He's connected with the source of wealth, which is that
Yes.
he's connected to the soil, which then brings the wealth giving grain, which is the source of the prosperity. And it's just an interesting
Mm. Mm.
transformation through time that Pluto has kind of disappeared and Plutus, god of wealth, becomes the only one. But Dante specifically uses Pluto, and he must have known both. He must have known
Yeah.
Pluto and Plutus. So it's just
Yeah.
interesting. In the modern world, we have tended to disregard the Pluto connection. And
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
and
Huh.
I just thought that was an interesting little thing um, to bear in mind. Um,
Hmm.
that was my only thought about this particular canto so far, but maybe there'll be another. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
So you were saying the anger is going on here, but there's other levels where he'll address that too, different types of anger, or
Well, let's see. He mentions acedia, the people under the marsh suffering from. We're not quite sure what to call acedia. It's a medieval term for. It feels like maybe melancholy in a way,
It's,
but
it's
it's despair.
usually
It's a good, right?
it's usually melancholia,
Yeah.
often in philosophical texts, but it's also a kind of inward dejection of the
Hmm.
heart. So
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
the kind of cold withdrawal, cast down gaze, frozen indecision, a kind of inner moment of alienation that's often
Yeah.
associated with
Yeah.
black bile. In Aristotle's work on De Anima, when he talks about the humors, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
you find the
Huh.
equivalent of acedia there with melancholia, which is also often associated with a kind of genius that augments the gaze and gives one a
Huh.
special sight or vision.
The mud that they're in doesn't even allow them to form words. I thought that was a
Yeah.
really powerful
Yeah.
image.
That's right. That's right.
That's how deep and dark their despair is. I mean, I feel that this was the first sin that I could definitely relate to. I mean, I feel like I've met this before. I hope I don't
Mhm.
go to hell because of it, but one never knows. I
Yeah.
also
What could be
wanted
worse?
it should be pointed out that the anger is anger without violence. I think that's important at this point
Uh,
because we're not
no,
yet
right. Very
with
good. Yes.
violent
Yes.
people.
Coming. That's
It's an
coming.
anger
There you
that is just sort of reddens the face, but doesn't cause you to punch the other guy in the nose.
go. Right. Good point. Yep. Yeah. Ed?
Yeah, I was just noticing that most of these sins are something today we would send people to a psychiatrist for some therapy.
Yeah, I was
Hmm.
going to say,
Hmm.
these days we address these with serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We have Prozac for this these days.
Yes. Well, and we don't necessarily think of our entire political world as limited to a city of 30,000 people.
But
Well,
also, I think it's a
That too,
really
right?
it's sorry, what?
I was going to say it's a city state, right? It has its own
That's right.
currency.
Yeah.
It's a commune. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. A medieval commune.
It's
Yes.
also, I was just gonna say it's a good point, Ed, and it's worth remembering that, the contemporary formulation of a consciousness, self-consciousness, and the kind of Freudian scheme of things wasn't born until 1905. This idea that we can somehow, in the romantic sense, turn inward and engage in these kind of contemplative acts with ourself that are fruitful for some form of inner life is a relatively new phenomenon. It's a relatively new idea. At this time in history, there literally just was no conception of that. And
Right.
so to be alone, to be like caught up in oneself in this way was considered sinful. That was because you were withdrawing from the world. Or you were, it was this kind of lone suspect thing. In the modern equivalent of sin in that sense is pathology, as you're pointing out, right?
Mhm.
Is pathology. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, let's go ahead to Canto 8. Um, we're about to catch a glimpse of the city on the horizon. And there's a wonderful kind of crescendo here of something pretty dismal coming as Dante looks up and they see, after reaching the lofty tower's base, he says, our eyes were following 2 points of flame, visible at the top, and answering these, another returned the signal, so far away the eye could barely catch it. So this is ominous. This is kind of like something from a medieval battle scenario, as the commentary points out. And so Dante asks Virgil about this and says, and before he can even give a reply, through the marsh fumes comes a boat, which is captained by this character Phlegyas, who's a figure from mythology of anger. And as often happens in the Inferno, he thinks Dante is some kind of interloper here. He doesn't understand how he could be here. And he has to be sort of reprimanded by Virgil, corrected, um, in order to get them in the boat. And of course, the other thing we notice that is when Dante steps into the boat with this amazing thing he has for keeping the physicality of himself in hell, because everyone else is a shade, sort of permeable. He steps into the boat, and the boat, he notes, goes down in the water. So just a tiny touch, but the poem is full of these tiny touches of a kind of imagined reality that Dante is so good at. Um, We boarded the boat, my leader first. It bobbed without a sign of being laden until it carried my weight, and so on. So, and this is one of the more upsetting cantos in a way for people who are particularly new to Dante, because in the muck and in the mire, he can't recognize any of the faces until one comes up to him and says, um, coated with mud, he addresses me, "Who are you to come before your time?" And I to him, "Although I come, I do not come to remain." And then added, "Who are you who have become so brutally foul?" "You see me, I am one who weeps," he answered. And then Dante replies, "And I to him, in weeping, in sorrow remain, cursed soul, for I have seen through all that filth, I know you." So this is a character that turns out to be someone Dante did indeed know, Filippo Argenti. Argenti is one of these kind of aristocratic, cavalier kind of characters that was thought of as very disruptive of public life. He, had a certain kind of charisma, and his last name, Argenti, apparently is a reference to his habit of shoeing his horses with silver. So he's a very arrogant fellow. And you can go a little further. He was also a member of the other party, the enemy party for Dante. And it was one of his family members who organized the confiscation of Dante's possessions and also voted against allowing Dante to return to Florence. So I was digging into the notes a little bit. I hadn't realized this, but we do wonder, why does he react so vehemently to this character and pushing him away from the boat, and then Virgil stepping in and commending him for behaving in this manner. And it's certainly, at the very least, because he and Dante have a history. And so at this point, Dante is still, you might say, kind of unreconstructed. We're going to see in a couple of cantos that his partisanship is still glowing. It's very strong. He has not mastered that. He's not put that aside in any kind of humility. So Argente is a character that he um, despised and maybe held largely responsible for a lot of his sorrows. So it looks like he's either too angry, or maybe we can explain it as righteous anger, but he certainly sort of breaks out in a surprising way, in a seemingly cruel way, to this character that he discovers down in the mire. And then as they move away from him, Dante says to Virgil, "Master, I should like to see that spirit pickled in this swill before we've made our way across the lake." And he to me, "Before we see the shore, you will be satisfied, for what you seek is fitting." After a little, I saw him endure fierce mangling by the people of the mud, a sight I give God thanks and praise for. "Come get Felipe Argenti," they all cried, and crazed with rage, the Florentine spirit bit at his own body. Let no more be said of him, but that we left him still beset. So very violent. Um, and then the very next thing is Virgil alerts him that they're approaching a city whose name is Dis, of solemn citizenry and mighty garrison. And Dante notices already on the horizon, and this is quite eerie, he sees mosques. "I see them there within the valley, baked red, as though just taken from the fire." And it is fire blazing internally inside of them that makes them so appear within this nether hell. Um, you know, the thing that's going on here with the mosques, Dante, in his childhood, was alive when the Seventh Crusade finally ended. And there was also, I think, a notion in Dante's mind, or just generally, that the Muslims were just sort of a kind of a heretic that meant you refused or just unreasonable in your rejection of the Christian truth. So it seems to be in a way kind of an intellectual error. After all, he's already put two Muslims in limbo. So intellectually, he seems to have a respect for Islamic knowledge. But here he's using the mosques maybe in a purely kind of symbolic way that would kind of be terrifying to the reader of, the enemy, the ideological enemy.
There isn't
Yeah,
there a notion here of that this we've entered into the sins of hardened will?
exactly.
That's the new era, and the mosques represent a heretic that can't, will not bend, will not
That's right.
break. So, and that's one of
Yep.
the reasons I think he uses the word, the walls of that bleak city, which seemed cast of solid iron,
Hmm.
this hardened, inflexible reality, or
Yeah, that's right.
religion in this case, or heresy.
Hmm. Hmm. So as they're moving toward the city now, Virgil refers to it as a battle to be won. And this is a moment when what's about to happen is that we all know, Dante is banking on Virgil. Virgil has evidently gotten kind of a divine dispensation to get him through this. And what's about to happen is that Virgil is going to run into his first obstacle when they see the three Furies up on the battlements. This kind of terrifying image of these figures from mythology. Um, there's even the Medusa and the threat of petrification being turned into stone. Virgil covers Dante's face with his hands and so on. Um, so there's something kind of sort of terrifying going on, as though maybe this whole scheme is about to go awry. So what's necessary is that Virgil go have a parley with the Furies, the demon angels, and find a way to get the gate open. And then he asks Dante just to wait patiently. And let's see, on page 65, right around line 90, Dante says, "You judge, O reader, if I did not lose heart, or believe then, hearing that cursed voice, that I would never return from there. Oh my dear guide, I said, who has restored my confidence seven times over and drawn me out of peril, stay at my side. Do not desert me now like this, undone. If we can go no farther, let us instead retrace our steps together." And Virgil attempts to reassure him, "Do not fear, none can deprive us of the passage one has willed for us to have. Wait for me here and feed your spirit hope and comfort. Remember, I won't abandon you in this nether sphere." And then Dante says something that I think I just noticed this for the first time. He says, "So he goes away and leaves me, the gentle father, while I remain in doubt, with yes and no vying in my head. What they discussed together or what my guide proposed, I do not know, for they were out of hearing." What struck me was this is Dante's in exile as he's writing the poem. He must have gone through all kinds of hell waiting to hear from the city. He made multiple attempts to try to get back into Florence to strike a deal. Could he do it without penalties? Certainly he didn't want to be executed, but could he not have all of his possessions confiscated? Couldn't something be worked out? He reached a certain point where he gave up, which may be about the point that he's writing the poem now. But this struck me as kind of describing his state of mind as he is so painfully and almost hopelessly waiting to hear something about getting back in his own city. I don't know if that's there or not, but it's something that struck me. So he says, "I see our adversary slam the portals of the entrance, in the face of my master. And Virgil comes back looking downcast. This looks very bad. After all, the rebel spirits have managed to defy Virgil, which he didn't think was possible. So Virgil says, "Don't be dismayed by my vexation. I will conquer this crew, however they contrive to block our road." This insolence of theirs is nothing new, and then he refers to a legend about Christ descending to hell and defying the angels and blasting open the gate of hell. Someone is coming to open the door for us. So that's the great hope here. It would appear that, there was kind of a close call. Dante is shaken now a little bit in his faith in Virgil. And I think it's probably also true that Dante the poet is saying to us classical reason is not enough. Something else is needed here in this vast, different kind of universe from the classical, and that help in the form of this remarkable angel will show up in the canto following. So, kind of a terrifying, moment there, which someone is going to turn into an amazing, CGI movie someday, but they haven't quite figured it out yet. Any thoughts on that one?
Oh, I was just remembering a favorite blues line of woke up this morning, had the blues three different ways. One said go, two said stay. That's Dante's dilemma right there.
That's right. That's great. That's great. Yes, Andrew?
Yeah, I just was struck. By, I don't know why I find it funny. Maybe I have a morbid sense of humor, but at the line on page 61 of the Pinsky line about 30, when it says, "Into the water, than it was wont to do with others. In the dead channel, one rows a beam." I mean, this notion that they're floating rapidly across this river, and suddenly this body pops up
Yeah.
that covered in mud.
Yeah.
And it turns out that it's somebody Dante actually knows
Of
that,
course.
I don't know. I just, there's something kind of comic about that.
It is.
But
You're right. I
then
think so.
going on, that it is so harsh. I mean, this sort of
Yeah.
pay line 43, arrogant in his vice. Was that one was that one when he lived? No goodness whatever adorning his memory. His shade is furious in the world above. How many a self-deceiver now counting himself a mighty king will sprawl. But then really this line of Dante's that I love, I just think this is like really master truly. I should like to see that spirit pickled in this swill. I mean, come
Yeah.
on.
Good translation. Yeah. Yeah. You
Anyway,
put your finger on something there that's about the Inferno, I think, which I think people have noticed. It has a comic grotesque quality, sometimes a little more on the comic side and sometimes on the grotesque side. And it goes back, it sort of oscillates back and forth. But I think you're exactly right about that. Um, and kind of disgusting. There are moments when it's just downright disgusting. So Dante has no qualms about that. He breaks all the classical canons about kind of what is high and what is low. So in his language, in the depictions of these figures, it's the entire human spectrum. He has no qualms about it. Any other thoughts on 8?
Yeah,
All
I mean,
right.
Oh,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I mean, I was just gonna say, I think going back to what you were saying about like reason alone is not going to be enough to get you through these gates, right? I think
Yeah.
it's very interesting the placement of how far Virgil has brought him before he
Hmm.
encounters that wall, right, that he can't get past, because it is, it's after these sins of incontinence, right? Like, and it's transitioning into these other sins, right? That we need that, you know, based on what will show up in 9, right? What seems like some,
Hmm.
that otherworldly, that divine providence from God or something. So
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Exactly. Anybody else?
Oh,
Yeah, Joan?
just the challenges of presentism. My imaginary, I could not get away from images of Peter Jackson's Marshes of Mordor when I am
Hmm.
seeing
Hmm.
the faces
Oh,
coming up
yeah,
out of the muck. It felt
yeah.
straight out of the movie to me. I kept trying to make that go away and get back into Dante's mindset.
Well, and Tolkien knew Dante very well.
Yeah.
So that's probably the origin of it. Yeah. No, that's interesting. Joan?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how, even though he speaks very in a very cool way, Dante, he's not really heroic. He's so dependent
Mm,
on Virgil and from some
totally.
above. So he's
Yep.
not like the hero of the epics, you know.
Mm-mm.
He's really not.
Or
He's
or
very,
not yet.
very
Not yet. Yeah. He gets better. He changes. There's hope for him.
It's a lot of work. He can say things, but he's not. He
So
faint.
far, no, no. So far, he's a scared kid holding on to Virgil's hand, right?
Right.
Yeah, Andrew.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about that part in Limbo when he meets the poets, Ovid and Lucan and all those, and there's that moment where he says, you know, I'm not going to tell you what we talked about, and they walk together,
Ah,
and
hmm.
I was thinking about that in a way, I was feeling like it speaks exactly to this point you were just making, Joan, which is that he's not heroic. He's embarking on a new type of epic, a new type of poetry, which doesn't require that kind of heroism. And I feel like he's running it by the masters of the heroic epic who have come before him. And so, he doesn't really need to tell us about that, but he needs to get some feedback from them, some affirmation from them that he's on the right path.
Hmm.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, very good. All right. Let's see. Let's enter the city of Dis. This
Elias,
fortified.
I'm just gonna
Yeah.
interrupt you for a second to say I have
Oh,
to pop
yep.
out this week a bit early, but I leave you in the steady hands of my compatriot tour guide through hell here. And I'll see you next Sunday.
Great. Great. Okay. Thanks, Sam.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye. All right. So we're moving into this strange image of a city, a kind of anti-city. Um, it's fortified. It has these red gleams of the signal fires on the top. There's a foggy marsh, and there are defiant devils in the gateway. Um, so, this where Virgil, as I say, insists that he knows the way, and he he says, I'm going to skip down a little bit past the Furies to on page 71. Um, Dante says, "O you whose mind is clear, understand well the lesson that underlies the veil of these strange verses I have written." So commentators are wondering, what is he hinting at here? Um, One possibility, there may be others that maybe would occur to anybody, and that is he's saying Virgil seems to have faltered, and that's the point we were making earlier, that human reason at this depth is no longer enough. So we don't quite know. But in any case, he goes on, across the turbid waves now came the noise of a fearsome crash by which both shores were shaken, a sound like that of a wind that gathers force from waves of heat in violent collision and batters